Well, first of all, I'm Indi Dutta-Gupta. I'm a visiting fellow and senior advisor to the CEO of the National Academy of Social Insurance. Really delighted to be here with you all. I hope everyone had a nourishing lunch and some great hallway conversations, or even in this room. As we're heading into the afternoon, we're going to pick up a thread that reaches all the way back to the New Deal, paid leave. It was part of the original vision, a policy meant to support care, dignity, which we've been talking a lot about, and economic security across the arc of life. But unlike other cornerstones of social insurance, it never made it into law. And nearly a century later, paid leave remains unfinished business in the American social contract. So this next plenary discussion is going to bring together leaders who are pushing that vision forward and asking what it would finally take to deliver on the promise of paid leave for all. So you'll hear from Sharita, Gruberg, and everyone will introduce themselves a little bit, but you'll hear from Sharita Gruberg of the National Partnership for Women and Families, Nancy Altman of Social Security Works, and Molly Weston Williamson, who we are also thrilled to celebrate as a member of the Academy's newest class, and the author of a recent law review article that makes a compelling case for how paid leave fits into the next generation of social insurance. So I am going to turn it over to Molly to help guide our conversation by providing some historical background and context on the relationship between paid leave and Social Security and the origins of this discussion. Thank you, Molly.
I'm going to sit so I can see everybody better because I think I'm too short for the podium. And we're also joined by Josh McCabe from the Niskanen Center, who's also an Academy board member, so we're extra excited to have him here. So building on a lot of what we've heard this morning, way back in the 1930s, FDR had this big idea. He said, what if we could create a universal social insurance system that would protect people against all of the hazards you can't prevent? He was also adamant that the cradle-to-grave phrase was his and that William Beveridge stole it from him. There's a whole bunch of historical dispute about who came up with it first. But the idea was, what if we created a system that said, all of the things that can threaten your economic security, all of these hazards, what if we gave you shelter against them throughout your life from cradle to grave? And so to operationalize this big idea, he creates the Committee on Economic Security, he appoints Francis Perkins to chair it, and out of the work of the committee comes the Social Security Act, which is the crown jewel of the New Deal. It's maybe the best thing the US has ever done in domestic policy. And the Social Security Act primarily creates two different forms of wage loss insurance. It says, we're going to give you a benefit to help make up for lost wages when you can't work because you lost your job, unemployment insurance. And we're going to give you a benefit to make up for lost wages when you can't work due to old age, Social Security retirement. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't protect you against wage loss due to illness or injury, even though that is very much the same kind of economic hazard as the ones that protect against. And that missing third piece, that missing third leg of Social Security, we talked a lot about how do we give things clever names. In 1930s, that was usually called temporary disability insurance, maybe cash sickness benefits. For a while, it was really just called health insurance. But today, we'd call that paid leave. And so the Social Security Act left out paid leave, left out this third kind of wage loss insurance. And the thing that sometimes gets lost in our historical story, unless you have Nancy on the panel with you, is that everybody knew this was a missing piece at the time. It was something that Roosevelt talked about. It was something the Committee on Economic Security studied really extensively. All the founding fathers and mothers of Social Security had this broader vision, of which one of the big pieces was this third missing form of wage loss insurance. And in fact, they thought about it so much that even after the Social Security Act was introduced, in March of 1935, the Committee on Economic Security wrote a whole amendment to add temporary disability insurance, to add paid leave to the Social Security Act. It's the only amendment that they wrote. They debated on it at length. So we had at one point all the words of here's how we'd add a temporary disability insurance benefit, including a maternity benefit, to the Social Security Act in 1935. But when the rubber meets the road, when we have the final text of the Social Security Act, that, as signed by Roosevelt, for complicated political reasons tied up with health insurance that we'll talk about more in a minute, that piece is left out. And so the absence of this third wage loss insurance, this third form of protection against hazards to your economic security, is a really big part of why when Roosevelt signs the Social Security Act, he says it's a cornerstone in a structure we are building, but which is by no means complete. And so this is a big part of how the system was incomplete then, and it's a big part of how it's incomplete now. And so now we're 90 plus years later, and we still have this unfinished business that Roosevelt spent the rest of his administration talking about fixing, that Truman spent most of his administration trying to fix, that folks like Arthur Altman spent the rest of his life talking about the need to fix. And so now we're in this moment to say, part of fulfilling this legacy, fulfilling this task we've all been working on, is once and for all, how do we come back and bring ourselves that much closer to that cradle to grave vision, and how do we make the whole rest of the system stronger by doing so? So we're really excited to talk about that today with a lot of really great experts here today.
Well, thank you, Molly. And in the spirit of unfinished business, you might be wondering why there's a person up here who I didn't introduce. And he is actually my friend, Joshua McCabe from the Niskanen Center. I am a last-minute fill-in backup moderator, so this is all on me. My apologies. And I was so looking forward to Josh being here, not just because of what he's going to say, but he has the very best socks game. And yesterday he had frogs. Today I think they're wise owls. So I hope you all can appreciate that. And thank you to Josh McCabe for being here from the Niskanen Center. All right, so one bit of unfinished business done. Now, can you all, we're going to start with you, Nancy, but we can sort of go down. Can you all sort of share, adding to what Molly's just relayed, I think a well-documented history, sort of the origin story in some ways of how we got here? What else contributed to how we got here?
So I would agree with Molly, except I would expand it. Today we think about Social Security as old age survivors' disability insurance, but they saw it as basic economic security. Franklin Roosevelt and his contemporaries and allies saw it as you were saying, cradle to grave. And it meant you had to have a good education. You had to have health. They thought there should be national health insurance, a single payer. You had to have a job. They actually, Harry Hopkins and many of them thought that government should be the employer of last resort, that unemployment insurance was just a tiny bridge if you were between jobs. They thought you had to have long-term disability, you had to have unemployment insurance, and you had to have short-term disability, which was both sick leave and also parental leave. There are all sorts of aspects, but they were concerned. It was such a big undertaking, much bigger than any government had done ever, that they wanted to be careful that it was successful. So they started with the old age and unemployment. 4 years later, they were added life insurance. Then we had World War II, but in 1956, they added disability insurance. As a fallback, they added Medicare, which they intended to be Medicare for all. They expanded Medicare and Social Security in 1972, and then all progress stopped. And so I think a lot of what we're talking about at this conference, I mean, obviously we're in a crazy period with the current administration, but it really started with the Reagan Revolution and reversing things. And it is time for a new revolution where we can continue to make progress on that vision.
Thank you, Nancy. Sharita, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Building off of that, so National Partnership for Women and Families, this is an issue near and dear to our heart. 33 years ago, we helped bring about the Family Medical Leave Act, but as folks know, that was not our end goal. Our end goal has always been paid leave. But I'm going to share a little bit about what it looks like not having finished the work and not having built that full cradle to grave social insurance safety net. And in particular, what that's meant for women and women of color disproportionately. So as was mentioned in an earlier panel, women provide most of the caregiving work, and most of it is unpaid. When there is a care need, it is the women, by and large, who are having to exit the labor force to provide that care. Black women in particular are overwhelmingly the breadwinners for their families. And so some of the data we found, 73% or, sorry, my notes are all a mess here. I tried printing and not reading off my phone thinking it would be smoother, but no.
I think I win for being smoothest.
You did. You were so good in there. But 73% or more than 100 million people nationwide don't have paid leave through their jobs. Again, women are less likely than men to have this access through an employer. That combined with more likely to provide the caregiving, you're pushing women out of the workplace. And when we're talking about retirement security and things like that, that all builds and has an effect. Accounting for time out of the workforce to provide for unpaid care, Institute for Women's Policy Research estimates women are cumulatively paid just 49 cents to the dollar paid to a man over the past 15 years. Women typically receive 24.7% less Social Security retirement benefits than men, have 18.7% less pension income, overall 32.6% less total retirement income. Again, when we're talking about Black women, when we're talking about brown women, Indigenous women, disabled women, those disparities get even greater. Also, when you're looking at LGBTQ plus women, we don't even have the data for that because we don't exist in this government's eyes. But when women have lower private retirement savings, Social Security is a vital source of retirement income. And so you're having folks who are not able to make this money over their working lives to provide for themselves and when they do retire, pushing back retirement. And then on top of that, a large reason for some of these disparities is the lack of paid time off when caregiving needs arise, either for ourselves or our families, which inevitably happens to women. So the lack of action in the New Deal has persisted, and what's ended up happening is women individually, our families are really bearing those costs and filling those gaps. But I don't want to lose the macro impact of this, which is we'd have over $6.7 trillion in additional economic activity over the past decade if we had the workforce participation rates for women that we have in our peer countries. So, at the individual level, at the family level, at the national economic level, this has been a huge loss that has just continued to expand since they didn't do the job in the first place.
Sharita, well, thank you. Thank you for that. You might know there's a sort of famous article on the housing theory of everything. I think you need to write the paid leave theory of everything article after this. But look, Josh, you obviously think about this from a policy lens, but also compare. Closer. Is it working?
Mine is.
This one's working. All right. So, Josh, you think about this from a policy perspective, but also comparative policy perspective, right? But history as well, I know. And I'm curious about sort of your take on the path dependence. How did we get here? And especially, Sharita brought some of this up, but how do we compare to our peer countries?
Yeah, so I'm a comparative historical sociologist by training, so I know this is after lunch for you. This is policy history for me, so I am revved up. If my accent comes out because I get excited, I apologize. Hopefully we can still translate it. But, Bernie Sanders talks a lot about Denmark. Megan talked a lot about the UK in beverage. I think those are both lame comparisons. I want to talk about the real comparison we should all be making, Canada. Right, so Canada had its own New Deal, arguably, before FDR, R.B. Bennett. But we can learn a lot of how they progressed to see where the U.S. is right now and potentially where we could be. So we talked about this possibility principle in sociology of the the U.S. is lacking something. I think Canada is a good case of what we could have had if things had turned out differently. And we sort of see sort of 4 phases in this. You see in the pre-war years, forget the Beveridge Report. Leonard Marsh wrote a much better report. You see a focus on unemployment insurance, right? Canada tried in 1935. It was declared unconstitutional. They did an amendment. They got it in 1940. So they had national unemployment insurance rather than provincial or state level. And then there was sort of a lull after that. And then in 1971, they were updating their unemployment insurance program, and they included maternity and sickness leave in 1971. Right, so that second phase of trying to complete that job. And then there was another lull. And then throughout the 80s, you have adoptive leave, you have paternity leave, and they finally just made a much longer parental leave in 84, 88, in 90. And the sort of the last phase after parental is that caregiving leave. So it wasn't until 2004 that Canada adopted really end-of-life caregiving. And then in 2017, right, pretty recent, that they adopted family caregiving. Right, so we see it's a work in progress in other countries. In some ways, the U.S. is still a laggard insofar as a lot of states don't have it. We don't have a national program. But in other cases, we've sort of leapfrogged that long history where 13, is it 14 today? 14 next?
Plus DC.
DC. And then Virginia soon, where you have comprehensive, right? So we're really on track if everyone works really hard.
I appreciate you not counting Canada as a state also.
Not yet. But it could be catching up pretty quickly with folks on comprehensive.
Well, so Canada seems to have done it in a bunch of steps. What are some of the steps that you could sort of foresee, or do you think we'll get it all at once at some point? I don't know, Molly, if you want to jump in.
Sure. So I think we've been very slowly taking steps for 80 plus years. We had the first state temporary disability insurance program in Rhode Island in 1942. A couple other states followed them. There's a famous quote where Wilbur Cohen in 1950 said, well, it took workers' comp a whole bunch of years to get to every state, but I think we can do this faster. I think we can do state temporary disability insurance faster. And then nobody else passed a program for 20 years, and it took 30 years after that to get the next ones. We didn't quite get there that fast. But what we've seen is right now, 1 in 3 Americans live in a state with a paid leave law. And we're growing that number fast. As folks have alluded to today, yesterday, both chambers of the Virginia legislature voted for paid leave. So we're coming for state number 14 pretty fast. But we're never going to cover everyone if we do it state by state. We are never going to get to the protections everybody needs or the portability everybody needs going state by state. And so we also need federal progress to provide the true universal guarantee that it's integrated with all of these other systems and that learns from, when you do things 90 years late, you get 90 years of learning before you get there. So we get to learn from all of the things we have learned from all of the other systems to build paid leave from a stronger place to begin. Federally, I think, we think a lot about the best time to pass paid leave was before. The second best time is right now. And since before is no longer an option, I think we need to keep working on how fast can we get as many people as possible as much of the protections they need while we keep working towards that universal guarantee we know that we need.
That is a great silver lining to being 90 years late to something. Nancy?
So one thing that makes our country different from Canada and the other countries is that we have states with delegated authority to the federal government. And during the 1930s, we had a very conservative Supreme Court, which knocked down all kinds of legislation as unconstitutional. Then, of course, we had the switch in time that saved 9 with, Franklin Roosevelt trying to save, actually, the Social Security Act and NLRB by packing the court. And that didn't go through, but the court started upholding these. And now we've got a Supreme Court, which is, don't get me started on the Supreme Court, but it could swing back. But in terms of the way that I see it proceeding, the Democratic Party has now embraced expanding Social Security. And most people, most politicians, interpret that as increasing the benefits or a better cost of living increase or child care credit, that kind of thing. But I think the choice of words expand is an important one because it expands to new risks that are covered. And so, as I say, we started out covering retirement and unemployment, and we expanded to life insurance, we expanded to long-term disability, and it's time to expand to short-term disability in the various ways we've talked about, as well as also Medicare, Medicare for all. And we do have the two action-forcing events that you've got Congress, and I think of it not as the trust funds being depleted, but as Congress has to act. They have to do something, and they will. And that's the point where let's hope we have mobilized and organized, and we can really push at that point a continuation of the vision they had of the New Deal.
Well, Nancy, you brought up the views of the Democratic Party, some consensus on this, but let me ask Sharita and Josh in particular, but you all can jump in too. Does paid leave strike you as partisan, bipartisan? How do you sort of think about, do you want to go first, Josh?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's depending on how it's structured, it could be bipartisan and could gain a bit more Republican support. I think the way we often talk about it and the things we often focus on may be of less interest to conservative audiences, but there's a pretty robust pro-life case for this. There's a pretty robust pro-family case for this. I often talk about, with my friend Brad Wilcox, he talks about the success sequence, right? You graduate from high school, you get a job, you get married, then you have kids. And I think that's a good foundation, but I think there's a lot of interest among conservatives in pushing back against what's called sort of workism, or sort of an unbalanced work-family life. And it's done in a different language than I think often happens in this room. But there are folks who think it's a shame that moms can't stay home with their newborn, and they might be forced to send them to a child care center instead, or that you can't take time off to spend with your aging parents or take care of a sick loved one. So it's probably not going to be the Family Act, but I think we've seen among Republicans a lot of folks trying to find their own way toward paid leave, and I think it's something to be encouraged.
I appreciate that, Josh. And Sharita, Josh talked, I think, with some emphasis on policy influencers and policymakers. What about regular voters or regular people?
Oh yeah, there is a vast divide between the people of Congress and the people that are voting, and we see that again when we mention what's happening in the states. The state paid leave bills are bipartisan. They're pushing it in Pennsylvania right now because when you have Republicans that are closer to the will of their constituents, they're feeling that pressure in a way that the members of Congress are not, because they're so detached and they're so far away. And the way it's looking in the states is completely different. You're seeing a whole lot of legislators across the aisle pushing for these comprehensive paid leave plans that, in fact, do look like very close to what the Family Act looks like nationally. It is ridiculous, the gap in political will and what voters want. The difference between Republicans in Congress and Republican voters. Paid leave is hugely popular across the political spectrum, to the extent that we're seeing polling numbers that align with values, not policies. It's not a policy issue for voters, it's a values issue. It is just something that you should be doing. We need to make sure that our electeds are feeling those consequences of not following the voters' will. We would have a national paid family medical leave program in this country, but for Joe Manchin. I don't want us to lose sight of the fact, we were one vote away from this. It's not that it wasn't popular. It's not that there wasn't a tremendous amount of support. Just one away. FMLA took multiple times passing Congress, but we had one president vetoing it multiple times. So it really is less of getting that step-by-step growth and more, how do we build that voter power? How do we build that coalition? how do we build that narrative that this is something that is a universal need, like Social Security, like all the other times we have had these great historic policy advances that really reflect the best nature of our country, and how do we create that broad-based momentum and urgency that is finally heard by the folks down the street?
I'm going to come back to the sort of the personal side of paid leave, which is relevant for all these policies. But can you all help us understand the scale of what people are asking for, the differences between different proposals? Partly because Nancy brought up the point that there's a forcing moment ahead, and maybe Nancy, you can give us a sense of that scale too, just for the Social Security, disability and old age and survivors income trust fund. But just so people have a sense of perspective in the aggregate, I don't know who wants to start, Molly.
I can kick it off. So the thing about a program where the point is to give people money is it costs money. Like, spoiler alert, it costs a lot of money to give people the money they need to cover their needs when they're dealing with serious health or family needs. But like L'Oreal, it's worth it. So a proposal like the Family Act would be 12 weeks of job protected. You get your job back after. I have to say that 400 times because it's a key part of making sure we get there. Progressive wage replacement, you get a proportion of your income for your own serious health needs, to care for a loved one with serious health needs, to bond with a new child, or to address the impacts of military deployment or domestic or sexual violence. On a progressive wage scale for basically all working people in the whole country, including the self-employed, including folks in public and private sector jobs. And to do that on the scale that we needed to, and 12 weeks is an important American marker. Our Canadian friends will laugh at us about 12 weeks. Our friends in almost every other country in the world will laugh at us, but 12 weeks is a lot better than 0 weeks, which is what we currently guarantee federally. Like right now, in the United States, at the federal level, we do not guarantee any paid leave of any kind. Not one day, not $1. There is no economic peer that you can say that about. And so we're talking about a program that, depending on exactly how we slice and dice it, in a 10-year scoring window, we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars. Like, exactly how we set it up affects how many hundreds, but we're trading that against the labor force participation increases. We're trading that against putting billions of dollars into people's pockets that they will turn around and spend immediately and go buy diapers and go buy groceries and put back in the economy. So I think when we're thinking about the costs, we also need to be thinking about all of the ways that for effectively 100 years, we've all been paying the price of inaction, and should get ready to, instead of paying this silly in all of the ways that we're all suffering, pay it smart and invest in that infrastructure as we've been talking about.
If I can, I agree with everything Molly said, but just to put it in perspective, whenever we, go into Venezuela or bomb this place or bomb, nobody says, oh my gosh, can we afford it? What does it cost? The reality is that we are an extremely wealthy country. We have a lot of income inequality, and there's a lot to be said about that and what should be done about that. But there's no question that what we're talking about is extremely affordable. Just as a baseline, Social Security currently costs 5% of gross domestic product. The actuaries tell us that by 2100, you know what that'll be? 6% of gross domestic product. That, and it's a time when, of course, the population is aging rapidly. So it really is, as Sharita said, a question of values. And on so many hot button issues, the American people are so divided. We're not divided on the issues we've been talking about here. I think, again, if you define bipartisan as not, can they get one vote in Congress that's, Republican or Democrat and call it bipartisan? It's, if you look at the American people and who's registered Republican, Independent, Democratic, the idea of expanding Social Security is extremely bipartisan, and specifically adding medical leave and parental leave is extremely bipartisan.
Thank you. You want to add anything?
Just to that point also, I think there's an assumption that, or some certain employers, although we have a lot of small business employers that are huge advocates for paid leave because they see the importance. But some try to create the impression that, oh, we're just not going to have workers. Folks are going to be on vacation. I've heard all of these arguments. But you look at, we have many states that have done this. We have a lot of evidence. Rhode Island, which had the highest uptake, was still 8% of eligible workers used it in a year. Very small, but it's incredibly important to have if you are in that small number that has a life event that needs it. And then on the other side, the benefits for business are tremendous as well. We did a study looking at Massachusetts. Any Massachusetts folks in here? Yay, awesome. There we go. Yeah, a guest from the voice that has had a very strong paid family medical leave program. And we were curious, going back to the whole picture and the health angle of this too, what are the impacts on health and well-being from this? And we looked at heart disease and mental health, depression, two really big issues. For people with depression, we saw better health days to a tune of $1.2 billion in productivity gains for workers over a year. That is huge. That's one health issue. For workers with coronary heart disease, that was $330 million in productivity gains. And when you're looking at a per worker cost of a couple $100 total, that's a huge value. But instead of policymakers focusing on these benefits, they're able to ignore these unseen costs that individual workers, that women and families are having to swallow and bear with no support. And it's really a matter of making those unseen costs seen so that we're able to have the full picture and not just the price tag that gives some elected some sticker shock.
Thank you. Massachusetts?
Yep. So I actually worry a bit more about progress on the federal level because there's two parties. There's one that doesn't want to raise taxes on anybody, and there's one that doesn't want to raise taxes on anyone making less than $400,000. And we've seen the success of paid family and medical leave has been built on a very broad payroll tax, right? That is the crux of this program. It's the crux of really good unemployment insurance programs. And the place where we've seen the most progress there is at the state level. And I think the sort of architects at the Committee on Economic Security saw this, right? The original plan was to do something like an unemployment insurance style, 26 weeks temporary disability, 12 weeks maternal, right? Structured the same as UI. So I think there's an opportunity that we can build on what states are doing by enacting some federal reforms that would allow states to do that. So right now, states cannot build paid leave into an unemployment insurance program. We saw Clinton try baby UI. We saw Trump UI, baby UI, or something like that. And there was a lot of interest in states, and not just in Massachusetts or Vermont or Minnesota, but in Texas and Florida, you saw legislation to try to move these things. So I think, oftentimes we think of it as sort of a federal solution, as primary, and states as like something we can do in the meantime. I think we should start considering what can we change at the federal level to help states do more of what they've already been doing and just make it easier for them to move it along in ways that we know the program works.
Well, let me step back to the sort of personal, as I said earlier, I would. Sometimes when we talk about these policies, someone will say, what's in it for me, or how would that help me, or I don't need that. So I'm curious if you've heard that from folks and what your response is, and anyone can take that, and I'll follow up with a couple more questions after that.
So never read the comments on anything, but if you read the comments on any news coverage of paid leave anywhere, someone will say something like, why should I pay for other people's kids? And number one, there's no such thing as other people's kids. We are all responsible for all children. But number two, what most people use paid leave for in virtually every state program in the FMLA is their own serious health needs. That is what most of the program is. And any one of us could get a cancer diagnosis, any one of us could have a serious accident. So for all of us, we are insuring against the thing we hope is not going to happen. All of us have somebody we love who might have a stroke, who might have a serious diagnosis, who might need us to come and help them. And so even if you are not thinking about caring for children, there's a lot left in this program for you, for your health, for the health of the people you love, and also for the health of all of us, right? Like, we know that when people don't have the paid leave they need, they put off or don't get the health care they need. Spoiler alert, putting off or not getting health care is bad for your health. And that has macroeconomic impacts, that has huge health impacts. So really, we're making an investment in all of our economic security, we're making an investment in all of our health, we're making an investment in all families getting to thrive, and that benefits all of us. The rising tide is going to raise all of our boats here.
Let me actually just open up for audience questions now, because I think we have about a little over 10 minutes left. But that was great, Molly. Do we have a mic? Thank you.
I'm Carl Polzer, Inequality Inc., and I advocate for low-income people. So I think I wrote a paper, an op-ed, three or 4 years ago. It was in the Examiner, because that was the only place that would publish it. It was talking about California's pioneering paid leave program and the structure. And I think what happened was that they analyzed it afterwards, and they found that it was redistributing money from lower income people, workers, to higher income. I think it was because the replacement benefits weren't high enough, so people couldn't stop working. So, I mean, I think that's an important, from my perspective, issue. We talked a lot about design in detail. And my second question has to do with messaging. I've written a lot about mentioning paid sick days. For low-income people, paid sick days are more important, really, because higher income people make the policy. And the upper middle class wants paid leave, which is great, but it's expensive. Paid sick days is 4% of payroll. And we take them for granted, but 25% or so of the blue-collar workforce doesn't have them. And I haven't heard much about that.
Sure. So quickly, on California, I know there were changes made to the program. There were concerns before about it increasing rather than decreasing inequality. I don't know if someone wants to touch on those quickly, Molly maybe, and then, Josh. And then secondly, you may be obligated, Sharita, to say something about paid sick days? Happy to. Okay.
So in California was the first state in the country to add benefits to bond with a new child or care for seriously ill loved ones. Some of the policy design wasn't quite right at the start. The wage replacement was too low. There were a bunch of equity barriers. And so California has gone back a whole bunch of times to make the program better. It is not where it needs to be, but it's a lot better than it used to be. And I think, again, the benefit of having had a whole bunch of different states that have done different things is we're getting smarter on what the policy design needs to look like to make it be more equitable, to make it be more accessible. A lot of that is about money. But it's also about things like, do you have a right to get your job back after leave? Because low-income workers are mostly not FMLA covered. It's also, a lot is outreach and education. It's just, do you know that this protection exists and it's available to you? So I don't think there's any state in the country that has perfectly cracked the equity nut that is doing everything in the way they want to be, but we know a lot more than we used to. We're getting a lot closer. And I think in every iteration, we are figuring out more, how do we make what should be a truly universal program, universal and accessible. Eligibility does not equal access. We're getting smarter and smarter on that as time goes on.
And just quickly, there's a gender component too, right? So I believe as we've made some of these changes, men are taking what percentage of leaves now in California?
So we have the best statistics on parental leave, because it's the easiest to get a straight split. And what we know is that in almost all state programs, men are taking 40% or more of bonding leaves, which was absolutely not true when California's program launched. We've seen big increases, a lot of which goes to, because we come to the economy as it currently exists, men are less likely to take leave if the wage replacement is lower. And so there's equity pieces, including impacts on women when men don't take leave, that come from making that policy design smarter over time.
Thank you. Sharita, sick days?
Yeah, no, totally agree. We need all of it. Paid sick days, paid safe days. There's a bill in Washington state right now to allow folks to use sick time if they're in immigration detention, because another thing, like, workers are not getting paid for when they're apprehended and detained for God knows how long.
What are safe days?
Safe days are if you are a survivor of domestic violence, allowing you to take time off work and not lose your financial security, which is a lifeline, while you're making sure that you're doing what you need to be safe, be it going to a hearing to get a restraining order, talking to a lawyer, any of those things. So there's definitely been a development in understandings in the workforce about what workers need to take care of themselves and their loved ones, and also not lose their livelihoods. But we don't have national sick days either. We need both. Our organizations all fight for both. We'll bring up Virginia again. Virginia is working on passing paid family medical leave and passing paid sick and safe days. What we've seen in a lot of states is they kind of start with the sick days and then they go back. Oh, there we go. The paper printing thing of the past. They start with the paid sick days and then, thank you, and then they come back to the drawing table and do paid family medical leave. Virginia is kind of doing it different and trying to do everything together, which I love, and I hope that's a blueprint for some other states too, because workers need all of it. And as you said, when you were talking about low-wage workers, when you're talking about folks who are hourly, the needs are very acute with those sick days. And so,
Thank you, Sharita.
We need it all.
Josh, you want to get in?
In Canada, right? They do targeting within universalism, right? This Theta Scotch Bowl concept, right? So it's mostly a flat 55% replacement rate, which works for most middle class families. But they also have the subcomponent. If your household income, I think, is less than $25,000 a year, you get an 80% replacement rate. So there's ways to have a social insurance program that does some extra progressive targeting within it.
Great. Questions? Maybe if you guys can both ask your questions quickly, and then I'll let you all say whatever you want. Maybe answering the questions.
Yeah. My name's Tracy. I'm a state paid leave administrator. I run the program for the state of Colorado, and I talk funny too. And my question is, I'm meeting with all of my peers next week. What else can those of us that are state paid leave administrators do that would make a larger national impact?
David?
David Jimenez with Niskanen. Obviously, much of the rhetoric around the fraud and program integrity conversations in Minnesota has been disturbing, demagogic, racist, plenty of other adjectives to add in there. But I do think it could very much shape the appetite for bipartisanship on paid leave on the Hill, and in progress on paid leave in red and purple states. So I guess what are the program integrity kind of fault lines, opportunities, remedies that advocates need to be thinking about in light of that?
Thank you, David. Final words.
I think having a forum where state administrators who are learning to deal with these programs and some of the program integrity issues, to his point, talking about them and addressing them. I think folks in the space know they're happening, but as soon as folks find the solution or the way to deal with it, just sharing with all the states. So I think a robust set of convenings where you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can do what Massachusetts did. You can do what Washington did and find those fixes really quick is going to be super helpful in the next few years.
Invite the Canadians. Final words? Whoever's ready with the mic.
I'm happy to go. I think the other thing that, we know there's a lot of amazing administrators doing amazing work, is also just continuing to tell the story of how good and valuable these programs are. I think a lot of times all the press paid leave programs get is negative. It's, the taking too long for benefits to go, and those are real problems we should address. But I think also lifting up the stories of how valuable it is when people get these benefits is equally important. And often, we've talked a lot about sort of narrative and culture change. Often the public narrative is totally negative when we know that in Colorado, in Oregon, in these states, huge numbers of people are benefiting every single day. And I think lifting up those numbers, but also like the stories, right? Like, what does it mean that you didn't have to put off getting the healthcare that could save your life because you couldn't afford it? You didn't have to sit next to the NICU bed or sit next to the hospital bed and run the tally in your head of how long you could afford to be there. So I think our success stories are an opportunity to lift up how valuable this is and how well it can work when we make the investments we need to make.
Sharita and then Nancy.
Love the administrators would say like, yeah, publish what you're doing, at least if you don't have enough to do, but telling that story of what the benefits mean, who's using it, what matters. Also, like, it would be awesome to have step-by-step kind of information from your perspective for the states that are looking to do this on how long does it take to get to the program up and running? What are the elements of that? And help do some of that co-learning, because at the end of the day, they're going to listen to you in a way that they're not going to listen to the advocates. And so your expertise is so powerful here. So I would just encourage you all to lean in it in any way that we can help. Very happy to do. On the fraud thing, yeah, we're trying to get ahead of that because we know it's not happening, but that assumption is always there. And we want to make sure we're not in that position with these programs, as was raised in earlier panels, that we're having such a high administrative burden on folks seeking access to these programs that they give up. Because we want to make sure, that folks can get access to paid sick days without having to produce volumes of evidence to their employer that they actually just need a day off, or, making sure that it's not too administratively burdensome to make the program not useful.
Thank you, Sharita. Bring us home, Nancy.
And first of all, I agree with everything my fellow panelists have said. Let me conclude with just two comments. And one is, sometimes you read, if Roosevelt were alive today, he wouldn't recognize Social Security. My view is that if FDR came back and looked at where we were, he would say, you haven't done more than this in 90 years? We look at our vision. But my last comment is to thank Rebecca and all the staff of the National Academy, because I think it really is important to be, even though we're at a moment where we're playing defense and we're trying to protect what we have, that we become ready and organized, because the moment will come when we can make real progress, and it will be all of us working together that makes that happen.
Thank you. Wonderful final words for the panel. Thanks to the panel and Rebecca.